Hello, BookTube, and welcome to Epic Comic Book Wednesday. This is a world's finest collaboration between Michael K. Vaughan and myself, where we combine the forces of stately Vaughan Manor and Hyde Cottage to talk about the comic books on which we have wasted our youths. And since I horned in on Mike's event going through his epic comic book collections, he gets to pick what we talk about. And he picked a winner today, an absolute winner. It's the Marvel comic book character Thor, but it's specifically Tales of Asgard, which was a backup feature in Thor's comic for a long time. You would get a little bit of a Thor adventure, and then you would get 7 pages of an unrelated story that would often have its own continuation. So, at the heyday of Thor and Journey into Mystery, the comic that Thor was in before he got his own title, oftentimes, an issue would have 2 cliffhangers. It would have the main Thor story at the front of the book would end with a cliffhanger, and then the Tales of Asgard story at the back would also end in a cliffhanger. And I think that I haven't watched Mike's video on the subject, but I think he's bringing it up. Just the conversations that we've had give me the impression that he's bringing it up because it marks a watershed change in the character of Thor. Thor was originally introduced in Journey into Mystery by Stan Lee in the early 1960s, and I don't know that I've ever read an interview where Stan Lee confirms this, but I think it's pretty sure that what he had in mind was not Norse mythology, it was Captain Marvel. The real Captain Marvel. Not the fake Captain Marvel, but not Carl Manvers, as the neck-bearded quasi-fascists prefer to her, but the real Captain Marvel, who started decades before Journey into Mystery, of course, and for a different company, in which a little boy named Billy Batson is given mystical powers by an ancient wizard. It says, you say the word Shazam and you will transform into Captain Marvel. One of the odd questions about Captain Marvel is, who is Captain Marvel? He's not Billy Batson. In the current conception of the character, in the last 5 conceptions of the character going back 30 years, he is. And of course, immortalized in the movies, he is. Where in those conceptions of the character, Billy Batson says his magic word Shazam, and he transforms into an adult superpowered body, but it's still a little boy inside it. It's still Billy Batson inside it. That wasn't the way the character was originally done. Captain Marvel sold enormously well for decades. For a good solid decade, outsold Superman. And that Captain Marvel was not that conception of the character at all. Billy Batson stopped being Billy Batson. He became a different person. And then that person, for some unknown reason, decided occasionally to say that magic word and transform back into Billy Batson. Why that Captain Marvel would ever transform back, we're never told. We don't know much about that Captain Marvel. We follow his adventures, but we never know much about him. And in that storyline, in that conception of Captain Marvel, the word Shazam is the first letters of a group of names, a whole bunch of Greek and Roman names, and also Solomon thrown in there, a whole bunch of mythological figures thrown in there, and you use their names to come up with not only the word Shazam, but also a tagline of whatever ability they are contributing to the stew of what Captain Marvel's abilities will be. And I'm pretty sure that Stan Lee, of course, read a million Captain Marvel comics and saw their success, their commercial success. And I'm pretty sure that when he was casting around for ideas for the first, golden age of Marvel Comics, he thought, well, I could do something like that. That's got a lot of gimmicky plot potential to have a weakling civilian identity that transforms to a superpowered identity by using something magical, some sort of magical transformation. And I bet Stan Lee's mind went, Greek and Roman stuff plus Solomon, whatever he's doing there, that's all taken. What about Norse mythology? Do I have somebody transform into Norse mythology? I don't want to be completely derivative. I don't want it to be, say the word Odin, and you've got abilities from 4 different beings who have their initials as Odin. So what if somebody transforms into Thor, the god of thunder? And, well, what is Thor famous for? He has a hammer. So maybe the civilian somebody has a thing, something he has in his hand, And I believe that it was thoughts along those lines that gave us the Marvel character of Thor, who is introduced in Journey into Mystery by the device of his civilian identity, just exactly as Billy Batson is introduced, and then we get Captain Marvel. That civilian identity is an American doctor named Donald Blake, who's a bit of a sad sack and who walks with the use of a cane. And he finds a cane in a cave in Norway, accidentally bangs it against the wall, and transforms into Thor to fight aliens from Saturn. That first episode was bad. Most of Thor's original year in Journey to Mystery were really bad. I thought the idea had potential, but I thought back then I would never have guessed that Thor would become my favorite Marvel character by a long shot. The problem was multiple. There were multiple problems with it, and they were largely the same problems that you get with Captain Marvel. That's what happens when you imitate a concept. You inherit not only the strengths, the neat strengths. Captain Marvel is essentially unbeatable, but he has to be around. If you can stop Billy Batson from saying his magic word, then you don't have to deal with Captain Marvel. Same thing with Thor in the Marvel lineup. Stan Lee introduces a limitation. If Thor is not touching his hammer for 60 seconds, if he goes without it, if he's out of contact with it for 60 seconds, he involuntarily reverts back to Donald Blake. That presents an otherwise unbeatable, physically unbeatable character with a great gimmick of a weakness, kind of kryptonite. But the problems are all the same. And you can see it in the that original appearance of Thor, where when Dr. Donald Blake transforms, he is still Dr. Donald Blake. He is not taking on in that initial appearance, he's not taking on any of the personality of Thor. And he looks at the hammer, and the hammer says, "Whosoever holds this hammer, if he be worthy, shall possess the power of Thor." Notice the loopholes right there, carved on the hammer. Will not be Thor. Will possess the powers of Thor. Clearly, what was on Stan Lee's mind at first with this character was that this would be a magically transformed Donald Blake, who would have the powers of Thor, his huge strength, his godly energy, his ability to control the weather. Thor is the thunder god. But he would still be Donald Blake. And it was only gradually that Stan Lee, once he came back to masterminding, he left the strip for a long time, and I think that's partially why Thor was such a slow bloomer of a character. He and Jack Kirby both left the book, and second and third raters took it over and didn't know what to do with it, didn't have any idea about it. When Stan Lee came back, he was faced with a lot of the problems that he himself had created. And I think it's pretty clear watching, once he comes back, Thor starts to blossom into a great reading experience. I was right there for that change. I was barely paying any attention to it, certainly wasn't collecting it, until that started to happen. Until Jack Kirby came back for artwork that was good when Jack Kirby had a strong inker. Artie Simic, for instance, did a lot of the inking in those return issues. They were good when Kirby had a strong inker, but Kirby is actually, you don't want a completely strong inker, because a completely strong inker of Kirby's pencils will sap the kinetic energy. And you don't want that. You want an inker who can give freedom to that kinetic energy that Kirby puts on the page, but not let it slop all over. And Artie Simic is not the inker for that. Joe Sinnott is not the inker for that. Even so, you could tell right away that something different was happening. And largely, the something different revolved around the backup feature of Tales of Asgard, because it became obvious that Stan Lee was not content with Thor being just Donald Blake, just a superpowered Donald Blake. Instead, somehow, ad hoc, sloppily, and messily over time, issue by issue, it became obvious that Donald Blake was changing places with the actual mythological Thor, the son of Odin, the prince of the otherworldly realm of the gods known as Asgard. And one of the things that helped that along was that Stan Lee thought up the idea of a backup feature called Tales of Asgard, in which we meet the Asgardian gods and all sorts of otherworldly monsters. Earth does not feature in Tales of Asgard. And often Tales of Asgard featured a younger Thor, a Thor who was a boy or a teenager, Often it didn't feature Thor at all. Often it featured Odin when he was younger, settling the mythological world, establishing Asgard, establishing his superiority. Those backup features of Tales of Asgard were incredible. They were like nothing that superhero comics had ever seen before. They were high fantasy. And they took off. Jack Kirby's artwork, he adopted a completely different way of doing artwork for Tales of Asgard, and only belatedly started importing that into Thor's comic itself. For a long time, over in the Thor part of Journey into Mystery, or Thor, you got a superhero adventure featuring Thor. And then you got pure fantasy. Just pure, wonderful, over-the-top, bigger-than-life fantasy. It was wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. And I believe it was what Stan Lee wanted to do with the character. Because gradually that starts to bleed over into Thor itself. Including, famously, the 5-part storyline in which Journey into Mystery becomes Thor. That 5-part storyline it certainly does not involve Mr. Hyde and the Cobra, or the Stilt Man, or anything like that. It involves Hercules and Pluto, the god of the underworld. It involves mythology. It's gigantic in terms of mythology. All of the best stories from the Lee and Kirby era of Thor are like that. They're all intensely mythological. But I also want to point out, all the best runs on Thor, just in general, whether it's Lee and Kirby or anybody else, are always mythological. That's why this character is so interesting. Because he is connected with Earth, he is involved with humans, he cares about his fellow Avengers, for instance, the fellow superheroes on Earth, and yet he is a god who is thousands of years old and immeasurably more powerful than all of them put together. That contrast is good enough on its own. You do not actually need the gimmick of Donald Blake. And you certainly don't want to spend a whole lot of time in explaining Donald Blake. Donald Blake is basically a lame, no pun intended, a lame fictional gimmick. And I think Stan Lee's clearest acknowledgement of that fact is when he gets around to giving Donald Blake an actual origin story, in which Donald Blake's actual origin story is that he actually is a lame fictional gimmick who was created by Odin as a lame fictional gimmick. And I think that transformation happened because of Tales of Asgard. I'm pretty sure that's Mike's idea. And I think he's right about that. That transformation really happened because of Tales of Asgard, which I loved, and a long time ago, Marvel reprinted a few Tales of Asgard in a comic book, and I had that forever and ever until mine fell apart, just fell off its hinges, fell off its staples. They reprinted that once, I think. I was wistful for Tales of Asgard, definitely so. Even when Thor reprints started to appear, I was thinking, well, this is fantastic. I'm very glad to have these stories in book form, because I reread them all the time. But I'm never going to see Tales of Asgard. And then Marvel did reprint Tales of Asgard in a big hardcover volume. First, they did it in monthly issues. High quality, glossy monthly issue reprints. Then they did a hardcover volume. And I would have been happy even if they had just reprinted Tales of Asgard, but they didn't just do that. They reworked the colors on Tales of Asgard magnificently. Every once in a while I meet someone who doesn't like this redo job. I do not understand that. I don't think there's any doubt here. No room for interpretation. I think it's just better. And I had all of those issues, but then I eagerly waited for the hardcover, which is this, where they put this is all of the Tales of Asgard with an Oliver Coipel cover that expands. You've got back cover there. The cover of this volume features Oliver Coipel drawing every character who appears in Tales of Asgard in a gigantic fold-out poster that just goes on and on and on. You've got his original sketchwork on the back, and you've got this finished poster on the front that's showing all the characters who are in all of these stories. And that would be great. I want to make sure to be careful with this thing, because I don't think this is in print anymore. I don't think Marvel makes this anymore. I want to be very careful with the poster. But on the inside, you get just incredible new versions of the inking just beautifully redone colors. Look at the shadings there on the grass, the shadings on the sky behind the characters, the glint of metal on the helmets. Just amazing. It just runs throughout here. Look at the brooding, the fading sunset back there, or the varying shades of the seawater here. That was not present in the original versions of these. I have the original issues with all of these, and they didn't look anything near this good. These are beautiful. This is just a beautiful recoloring job that they did, which really allowed me to appreciate these things even more. You have Stan Lee got a chance to just write Norse mythology, just the Ragnarok. He gives us the whole picture of Ragnarok. Amazing, just amazingly done. Look at the variations there, the glowing eyes, right? The glow of the fire in the background there with all the corpses around it. Just Kirby's original artwork here. The inker that we found here was Vince Colletta. Vince Colletta, for the main Thor volume and also for Tales of Asgard, was the dream inker that Kirby needed. The one who could respect the kinetic energy of his drawings and also tighten it up a bit. And these Tales of Asgard stories, they reached their peak for me with a story about a warlord named Harac, who he's assaulting Asgard, and Thor and the Warriors 3 make their way into his stronghold. There is Harac with a magical MacGuffin that gives him the power to threaten Asgard. Thor and his friends reach Harac's stronghold, but without that MacGuffin, Harac is just an ordinary warrior. And there's a point here in the storyline that Stan Lee doesn't stress, of course, because this was the 1960s, this was Comics Code approved. But the point in the story is Thor and his comrades realize that Thor and Harac are dead ringers for each other. So that's going to be the gimmick. Thor is going to impersonate Harac in order to talk to his soldiers, get them to stand down, and save Asgard that way. But in order to do that, he has to knock Harac unconscious. And the point that Stan Lee does not stress is Thor, of course, is 1,000 times more powerful than Harac. He punches him, and the punch is fatal. That's the point that Stan Lee didn't really want to. He didn't really want to stress it, but Harac does not recover from that punch of Thor's. He doesn't have other wounds. Thor just kills him. Might not intend to, but he does. But for a while, Harac is laying mortally wounded, obviously, because Thor has turned him into mashed potatoes. And when he's mortally wounded, we hear ominous hoof prints in the distance. A black horse is approaching. The black horse of death, because Harac is doomed. The horse has come to his door because he is to be suited in his best armor, propped up on this horse, and taken to Valhalla, to the Norse afterworld, where warriors fight forever and are wounded and die and then spring back to life and share mead in a raucous mead hall with the men they fought. And they'll fight again tomorrow. They'll fight forever. The sheer narcotic joy of combat. I don't think Stan Lee ever felt. Jack Kirby did. I don't think Stan Lee ever knew what that felt like. And yet he managed to capture it perfectly, probably because he got it from Sir Walter Scott. But Harac's men suit him up and they put him on his horse as Hela, the goddess of death, arrives with her Valkyrie guard. At Hela's command, let all living faces be turned aside. Let every eye be thus averted. 'Tis not for the living to behold which shall now befall. Harac has passed this way but once. His like shall not soon be seen again. Harac is drooping on his horse. He's mortally wounded as she takes him through the mist to the bridge to Valhalla. I was reading this all 50 years ago and just being blown away by it. Nothing like this had ever happened in the main Thor comic. The main Thor comic was good. It wasn't anything like this. Harac is drooped over his horse. He is effectively dead. He crosses the bridge, and in this coloring, it gleams. Look at that. It gleams. And the mists part, and he sees warriors on the foothills of Valhalla, awaiting him. They tell him, here thou wilt find the heraldry, the battle, the adventure thy spirit craves. Here, midst pageant everlasting. Know thou, Harac, that death is more than an ending. 'Tis the greatest beginning of all. 'Tis to our side, then, warrior, we await thee in our serried ranks. And you don't believe that it's going to happen, because Harac he's at death's doorstep. But actually, he's beyond death's doorstep, and he says, the weariness doth leave my limbs. I feel new strength within me, vigor such as I have never known. The sound of battle, the clang of armor, the most joyous music ever heard. To arms then, one and all. Let the trumpets blaze, let the flags unfurl. To call to battle fills the air. Now shall a warrior ride. Look at that. Look at that. That is incredible. Thor and his comrades drink to his, to his happiness in Valhalla. They neatly overlook the fact that Thor blew his head off. But that sequence is incredible. There's been nothing like that in Thor. And there was a lot like this after Stan Lee broached what I believe is a new tone for Thor, which is that the thing that will make this character work will be the mythological side, not the, oh, will he or won't he touch his hammer in 60 seconds side. Not that. It won't be the Captain Marvel gimmick. It will instead be the mythology. Having this mythological being interacting with the normal mortal world, or for long periods of time, not having the ordinary mortal world in his stories at all. The best Thor stories don't involve the mortal world at all. So I was very happy that Michael K. Vaughan picked this time around. I've read and reread this Tales of Asgard volume forever. I don't believe this ever had a paperback. I've never seen it. Very happy to have it. Very happy also. I would have been happy anyway with a hardcover. But it's just ecstatic that this recoloring job makes it all seem so much better. So that's our Epic Comic Book Wednesday for today. It's Tales of Asgard. What a pick. What an absolute pick. So I'll wrap this up for now with fear and trepidation for what Mike will pick next. We'll see. We'll all reconvene next Wednesday, and I will see you then. Thank you, BookTube.